All right, let's get started with the stream. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's stream. I am here with Jason Snell and Dan Moren of Six Colors, and we are going to talk about podcast notes is the name of the shortcut.
We should have come up with a better name.
It's hard
Jason.
to name these kinds of things, but
I
basically,
mean, I called it podcast noter, which is terrible. And then Dan changed it to, I think, podcast
note. Oh, that was my contribution. It's a little editing.
Remove
Yeah.
it's
that
just a
R.
little delicate. Remove
it's
the R.
like edit points, chapter markers, everything in between.
Yeah, it's a note taker for elapsed time. I mean, it could be used in a lot of different ways. Obviously, for people who do podcasts, what you're really doing is saying, I'm not just taking a note. I'm taking a note and automatically noting the point at which the note occurred.
Mm-hmm. And it's a timestamp in a file that then your editor can take and then just immediately go in and fix those problems.
Yeah, I mean, the origin of this project was really that one of my kind of vows for 2022 was to pass on some of the editing work that I do to another editor. And the deal I made with myself was that I was going to need to take better notes because I was relying on my memory of the session I had recorded to inform my editing decisions. And now I'm handing it off to somebody else and I can't hand them my memory. So I needed to make a system where I could take better notes.
Yeah, totally. Makes sense. And so, Dan, you took what was...
I wrote an AppleScript.
Yeah.
Jason, in his time-honored fashion, decided AppleScript is his first language, and therefore every problem can be solved in AppleScript. Which I don't. Hey, I have done the same thing with PHP, which is the language I learned first. I was like, how can I apply this?
It's
right?
It's not even quite that. It's that the muscle memory of I need to look at a file on a Mac and determine its attributes. It's like, oh well, I got to do that in AppleScript, and it never even occurred to me that I could have done it in shortcuts, which I feel really bad about now. But it was it's that muscle memory of, oh, are you dealing with files? Then you must script the finder in AppleScript. And then Dan just ripped the Band-Aid right off and was like, no, do not.
Well, I've had the opposite experience where every time I tried to automate anything on the Mac prior to shortcuts was using Automator because I never really knew AppleScript. And every exercise with Automator was, oh, this should be easy. And then you go in and you're like, I literally understand nothing about what this is happening here. And I've been using a Mac for 30 years. I don't get what you're trying to do.
It like blew me away because I don't think I even could process what was in Automator at all. And then after literally working at Workflow and then opening Automator, and I'm like, oh, these are workflows. Like it is Automator for iOS, and then now it's come full circle. Or it's like
Automator was clumsy, and it didn't.
Exactly.
It's the same idea. You can absolutely see the building blocks that get you from one to the other, but for whatever reason, Automator was just never really was intuitive in the way that I think Workflow and shortcuts were.
Totally, and especially just drag and drop helped a lot, and taking just personal functions. I mean, even not having the weight of the Mac on it and starting with like iOS and just the underlying technology and everything made a huge difference there.
Yeah, I would even argue that because there was no AppleScript on iOS and because everybody had invented, X callback URL and everybody was all the commands were being passed by this other system that then Workflow was built on top of. That allowed Workflow and shortcuts to like have this broad base that Automator never had. Like Automator, all the apps on the Mac when Automator came out were still sort of like, AppleScript. Yeah. And so it never really got that. Whereas Workflow kind of came in on top of that existing sort of system that was such a hack that it needed more structure, and that Workflow got to provide it. And it was magical, and it is, it's taken it so far beyond. I think the Automator idea was the same idea, but it just didn't happen.
The execution wasn't there.
Yeah, exactly. And just, I mean, even I was looking at how to like take this shortcut and then take it to the next level by importing it into Logic and adding the markers. There's no AppleScript support for Logic at all. So I guess it makes sense because with audio production in music, maybe there's not as much of the workflow that podcasters have, but obviously it's not built for all of us kind of. So I couldn't even figure out how to add markers just before this, so I guess I've forgotten since the last time I used it, because Ferrite is definitely like just much better. So yeah, I mean, should we just get into it? I'm very curious, even like how your Apple script, Jason, how you put it together, just from the experience that you have and things like that.
Well, the Apple script, I mean, the truth is that the Apple script and the shortcut do exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Like exactly the same thing. What I did with the Apple script, I had to do. I wonder if I could just bring that up and we could show
sure.
that. And people can.
We might have to mess around with the scenes a little bit, just because screen sharing can be wonky.
Screen sharing can be weird, but let me see if I can. I can open this Apple script here in a form where people can see it. Let's do that. I'm gonna share a new screen with you, and it's gonna be podcast noter. Okay, forgive the.
This is okay.
It's Apple script.
I
so
guess you'll be at the bottom now. Sorry.
It's fine. Hi, I'm down here. It's doing what Dan did, but like I said, I reflexively chose the Finder scripting, because if you're dealing with files in a script on the Mac, like you could do it in Python. There are lots of places you could do it, but really, sure, it's all the go-to has always been just use Apple script, because you script the Finder, which is one of the big differences between my approach and Dan's approach, because and it's beautiful. In shortcuts, you just deal with the files, whereas in AppleScript parlance, you don't deal with the files, you deal with the Finder and have the Finder deal with the files, because everything is about scripting an application, where Shortcuts tries to abstract it. So what I have here, the key part is tell application Finder, and it's basically set a variable called the matches to every file of the save path, which is my desktop in this case. Every file whose name contains this string, which is year, month, day, because that's what I wanted to key off of. And you could key off of file type or creation date or whatever. I just chose that because every single one of my podcast recordings has the date in that format in its file name. Yeah. And then it does a repeat loop, and it goes through one at a time through all of those items. And by the way, that's a not appreciated part of AppleScript that's really good, which is the filtering on the fly, where it's every file whose name contains. It's pretty good. That's actually a pretty real time saver. But then I'm looping through, and basically I'm looping through the entire record and basically saying, find me the one that has the most recent creation date. So if I recorded 2 podcasts today and they're still on the desktop, which they shouldn't be, I want the one that was created most recently. Or if I stopped recording and then restarted or split my recording or something, it's trying to time it based on the most recent one.
Yeah.
And then after that, all it's doing is it's getting the creation date, it's getting the current date, it's getting the difference between them, so that it can create essentially a timestamp of how long has it been since this file was created. The whole idea here is you could set it manually. You could press a button that says now the podcast is starting, but the best thing to do is just have it be based on the runtime of the file, because the file is what you're handing to the editor. And then everything else that happens here is just inserting the timestamp and the note in a field.
Is that a function in a file of Audio Hijack being able to it's like writing the file in real time?
Yeah, my recording is happening in Audio Hijack, and Audio Hijack is literally, the file is open on the desktop and it is writing to it. So the modified date is always going to be basically current, but the creation date is what you want. That's the moment that file was started.
Yeah.
And then everything else here is literally just it's actually using a Unix shell script to append to a file. But the real magic here is just doing the Finder scripting at the top that says, look at the desktop, give me a list of the files that match my filter, and find me the one of those that's the most recent. And that's all the data I need, is the modification or the creation date of that file. So that's all my AppleScript did.
Nice. That makes sense. Can you show us your Audio Hijack setup too? Or I don't know if that's proprietary.
I can't.
Or fancy. Okay.
I actually can't, because Rogue Amoeba has announced there's a new version of Audio Hijack coming, and I have it and I'm using it, and you can't see it because that's
imagine it. Imagine
there's
what
thing
it
to
looks
show.
like.
But basically, you just it's recording my microphone, and it's recording my Zoom audio, and saving them to the desktop as waves. That's it.
Fair. Okay. Didn't you publish it at some point before also, like a previous version?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's on 6 colors, but it's not that interesting. It's just you're just lining up little blocks in Audio Hijack to save a file to the desktop.
I disagree, sir, because
Okay.
I have no idea how to use. I mean, I know, but I think I just don't see too many examples, and so I actually think that's super helpful. And
Okay, well, all right. I've got Audio Hijack.
you can show me after the stream if
Here,
it's secret.
I'll give you a quick look.
Hi, Dan.
Hello.
Hi, Dan.
I know.
Oh, there's
I'll
my
just
name.
be.
Dan's gone.
I'll just be here in the.
Well, we're looking at Dan and observing him. Okay, now I'm sharing. This is the this is an Audio Hijack project, and so you can see that I'm recording. They all go kind of left to right. They're all in a little chain. People don't know they don't have to be connected. They can be totally separate. So in this case, at the top, I have my microphone. It goes to a recorder block. That's what's saving out to the desktop. Down bottom left, I've got Skype and Zoom, but I mostly just use Zoom these days. I'm recording that. I've got some other blocks here, a volume block. If somebody's really quiet, I can crank up their volume, and then it goes to my headphones, so I can hear them. And then they both get run through a compressor, and then a low quality version of my microphone and their microphones combined is written out as an MP3. That's because some of the podcasts we do have the bootleg version for people who are subscribers, and that's generally unedited after the fact recording, and so I record that as well, and then I just have to post that file. I don't touch it. It is literally, it used to be like you take the files and make the MP3 and all that, and I just use Audio Hijack to make that MP3.
That makes sense. So the 2 recorder blocks are the ones that you actually edit with, and that one's
the 2 waves.
The rest is just to
the 2 mono waves, and they're going to the desktop, and they all got that name, and then the MP3 is also going to the desktop, and it's got a different name.
Is CorvPressor part of Audio Hijack, or is that
no? CorvPressor is a third-party audio units plugin that does compression. Logic also has a compressor. And one would hope that in a future version they might have a better compressor, but for this example I'm using CorvPressor.
Yeah, I have like Isotope, but I also, that's an app that I'm like analyze and fix, do it. I don't know what I'm doing there either, so that's a whole other deal. Cool. So that is how you get your stuff into the shortcut, and then, or that's being recorded, and then the shortcut looks for this active file, and then is like adding the timestamps into a plain text file. Let me see if, because you had that little image. Actually, I can just bring up, I have your articles too, so that might be easier. So this was the old version. And sorry, let me just make sure. Okay, yeah, you guys can see everything good. This was inspired off of Mike's just taking notes originally for Upgrade. Which is like totally makes sense. That's why
that's what he does.
It's sometimes I'm just like, oh, I probably should have done that instead of trying to build this shortcut for the last year and a half or something like that. But then, so you have just the 2 buttons. Oh yeah, can we see? Oh yeah, this is what I was going to go for. Is like, this is the end result. And
right. It's literally just a text file with time code, a dash, and sometimes text if there's text to be had.
So one thing that I'm just trying to process this as I go too, because I've also been trying to create a similar thing for live streaming and stuff like that. Just to be able to add chapter markers like during this when we switch segments in between conversations. And then the other part that I was just curious about with podcast editing is trimming silences, because do you have to go in and fix all of these and then trim the podcast down, or how does that work? Or I guess you're not even the ones that doing it.
In general, you want to do your you want to do your edits before you start trimming stuff, right? Because then the time codes don't line up anymore.
Totally.
So generally,
that's only because of this
first
workflow, basically.
Yeah, I mean, or anything else where you take a note, right, and say like, even in doing this in a plain text or just writing something down, which I've done before, which is the squishiness, I think, is what Jason was trying to eliminate here, right? Is like you go in and somebody coughs or swears or something, and you're scrambling to find a text file, or I know Jason used folders on his
They can do a
desktop or
folder
like
on the
whatever.
desktop and say 56-minute cough.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. But by the time you've done that, a lot of times it's like a few seconds afterwards. You have to type it. You've missed the time code, and the brilliance of the solution is because it's based on the length of the file, and that's what you're ultimately working with. Then you already have the time code information, and it's way more accurate than it's going to be when you try to write it down. You don't have to go searching for it. You can be pretty assured that, like, hey, I dropped that file into Logic. I noted it exactly when I hit that button, so like it's only maybe a second off from basically whenever that event happened. So that to my mind is what makes this workflow work, is just the accuracy with which it can help you do these things.
Because I mean, we should have had your editor on it too. If he's like, this saves me an hour or something like that, because I always knew that it's like I just took whatever the recording time was, double that, and that's how long at least I would probably spend editing, because I would be cutting down moments. I mean, I would edit for content too in a different way, but
there's different ways of editing, and you can do a heavier touch or a lighter touch. But yeah, in terms of how this note system works, one way to do it is to just take a first pass once everything's in there and go find all the sore spots and get rid of them, and then start from the beginning and sort of realize you're going to close all that up. You can also use it as a general guideline, because really, unless there's a major thing that you're removing from a file, if you remove a few seconds here and there, and so your thing says it's at 1 hour 2 minutes and it's actually at 1 hour 1 minute, it's close enough. You've got the warning that it's generally, this is not going to be pinpoint accurate, and it doesn't need to be.
Can we make the shortcut add plus or minus a minute on either side so that it's a range?
So something that you should know when we get to Dan showing off the shortcut is the shortcut does a really, really clever thing that I had never even considered, which is it logs the time when you press the button, when you hit the shortcut.
Yeah. Oh,
and not after you are typing in your text about what happened. So when you hit enter and it gets written to the file, it's not the time code at the moment that you finish typing your note. It's the time code when you initiated the shortcut.
Here, let me
I will say, just for fun too, like I I had an error I realized when I was trying to use this shortcut for the first time, sort of in production the other week, where at some point I had flipped the minute and seconds, and so I was looking in the file for like notes, and I'm like, God, there's nothing here. And I'm like scrubbing through the entire file trying to figure out where this was, and eventually it was like giving up, like, oh, I guess I'm not gonna be able to find these. And then I realized, you know what, I had flipped to them, and so like I was like, oh, and I had already done edits at that point, so then I had to go down and track down based on I was like, okay, I reverse the time code, then add a plus or minus few seconds and look around that area to see if I can find what I was supposed to trim out in the first place.
And that's good. At least you figured it out.
Because I was like, wait, is this totally broken? What happened? I feel like it worked the other day. No, it's just a stupid error. So I mean, so the shortcut again. So I took Jason's article and thought, this is great, but I'm never going to figure out how this works in AppleScript, and I can certainly take his and adapt it to my own uses. But it occurred to me that, as Jason said, working with files feels like a thing that Shortcuts is actually pretty good at. Mm-hmm. And so I sort of, rather than looking directly at his shortcut or at his AppleScript and like trying to rebuild it piece by piece, I just sort of looked at this description of like, this is what it does. I was like, all right, let's see if I can just sort of reverse engineer that in Shortcuts and figure out all the steps. And so it ended up with something that is in some ways very similar. And obviously this version's been through a bunch of different refinements as Jason and I sort of bounced it back and forth.
Yeah.
But as he mentioned a moment ago, like the first thing it really does is get the current time, because that is the time where you press the button, where the script is summoned, and that is the closest to the actual time code of the event that you're going to get. As with Jason's script, this has like a section where it's like, okay, now what do we do about noting, the information that you want to record, right? Like what happened at this time code? So we can ask for that kind of text. We can also pull it sort of from shortcut input if that is an option.
And that's the Stream Deck option, basically.
Yes,
there.
right. Like,
nice.
I think there is a way to essentially have different shortcuts that are like hotkeys, right, for a specific type of thing. Like if people cough all the time, or you have somebody on who has got some background noise, then it can be easier to sort of be like, all right, I don't even need to think about what I'm going to type in. I can just hit this button and it automatically says, at this time there was a cough, at this time there was a swear, etc. But
nice.
It also allows the freeform ability to just sort of type in something random if just something totally unexpected happens. There's a helicopter landing in their yard or whatever.
Construction noises in the background.
Exactly. My setup differs a little bit from Jason just because my podcast recording structure differs a little bit. I have a folder that is called In Progress, which is basically where I dump anything Audio Hijack is currently recording. But I take sort of the same approach, slightly different, but generally the same idea, which is looking for those WAV files and looking for ones that were created basically within the last 6 hours, figuring I'm unlikely to be trying to do anything with a podcast that's older than that, sorting by the creation date with the most recent first, and just getting one. So just get the most recent WAV file that's been created in this directory, and let's assume that is the WAV file for the recording we're working on.
I want to praise shortcuts there too, because that is, I talked about my AppleScript code.
Yeah,
This is such a nice action to
filter is
filter.
really good.
You're picking, you got the folder, and then you've got this picker of any or all with multiple selections, and then you can sort it, and then you put it in. It's so good. Sort order, limited to one. It's just a very flexible action.
My one beef with this action, because I was using it in a different shortcut, is I feel it really needs sort of and or support, like Boolean support, because like any and all are good, but sometimes you want to do sort of like a nested, like this and this or something like that. And it's like, I know it's a little more complex. It's got a little more power to it. I'd love to see that as an option, because what I ended up having to do with a separate shortcut was like chain multiple filters together in order to get like just the file that I want.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think that's the recommended method.
Because and I just it feels kludgy. I would love to see some options for sort of like a little bit more power. For those who are comfortable using like Boolean expressions for this kind of thing, there's a lot you can do there.
I think that's true with most of the filter actions in general with shortcuts, is just that you can filter once and then filter again, but it would be nice to do it in a single
feels a little bit like built out of just sort of the classic Mac stuff, like with your find filters and stuff like that in the Finder. They any and all are very simple ways to sort of conceptualize those ideas without having to get into sort of the nuts and bolts of logical expressions. But it's certainly nice to be able to have that power if you can get it.
Fair. I loved
we're at the name that tune part of the shortcut now, Dan. We had a bunch of readers come up with different ways of calculating out and outputting the timestamp.
Yeah.
And Dan, actually,
I'm
Dan's shortcut and my shortcut that I've got open here are not using the same method, which is hilarious.
Yeah,
I haven't updated mine with the like sort of like mainly just for the purposes of like transparency. I liked having this one in here because it's very clear to me like which expression is which. Everything else, there are a lot of other options that like cut down the number of actions that it takes, which are really elegant, but they're definitely a little more obfuscate. They're a little less like clear in the way that they're working, because they're taking advantage of some sort of shortcuts and jiggery pokery to sort of get to the right answer that you want. Like, so this one, sort of very straightforwardly grabs the creation date of that file that we are recording, that WAV file, and it gets that current date, and it gets the difference between them in seconds, which is great. It's like, all right, we know 115 seconds or whatever have elapsed since the file started to when you pressed the button. And then the trick from that is getting that into a timecode format, which proved to be the most difficult part of the whole experience.
Definitely.
So in the original shortcut I wrote, I ended up sending it out to a shell script in Python, because Python has a very handy function that just lets you reformat like a date as any other type of date. And shortcuts allows you to do some of that. It's got that format date feature, which is very handy, but it really does not seem to be able to just handle like, give me a duration and turn that into a time code. You have to do some stuff where it's like
yourself, basically.
Yeah. So I mean, to Jason's point, the suggestions that we saw were very clever things, like start at the beginning of the day and then get the duration, and then sort of use that, because the time code equivalently looks like if it's a minute past midnight or whatever, then it's
brilliant. it's brilliant, right? Because if you set it if you add your number of seconds to the beginning of the day, then if it's an hour and 10 minutes later, it's 1:10 a.m., but you can format that as 1:10 and you've got a
Yeah.
time code. However, you need to
Ugh.
make sure that you're using, I think it's K instead of H. Otherwise, minute 12 is 12:12 because it's 12 a.m.,
Yeah. So
which is not as good.
Not
But
Yeah.
there is a military format time thing, which is K, that sets it to 0. So I'm doing that method. I'm actually adding the number of seconds to the beginning of time and then just getting a time that is from midnight, essentially.
Yeah.
And that's just another way of doing it. It turns out there are lots of different ways, and what Dan's doing here is the math, which is, you divide it this way using the calculate expression, which is poorly documented by
Yeah.
Apple, but
Let's say not
powerful.
documented.
Yeah, I mean that came
poorly-
out in the last couple. I don't think they've documented most of the new actions.
Yeah,
No.
it's a great expression because, and I use this elsewhere. I wrote maybe last year about I wrote a shortcut to do feels like temperature based on local readings, essentially taking humidity and temperature from my location, using like even indoor weather sensors or whatever, and calculating what the feels like temperature is. And the feels like temperature is a very complex formula, which you
Yeah.
can go find. But I was trying to figure out, and then I realized there is this calculate expression thing, and I could essentially translate that formula into a very complex, like, calculate expression. It's very long, and it works. It does work.
Yeah.
But in order to figure out, like, all right, how do I translate this, like, literally a math equation into functions that are available to the calculate expression action in shortcuts. So I eventually turned up some documentation on,
let me
I want to
show
say,
it real
Reddit.
quick.
Yeah.
I think
Which tells you basically here are the functions that calculate expression supports. And it's essentially based on, I think, functions in one of Apple's math libraries.
Yeah.
But nowhere does it tell you this, right? Like, nowhere does Apple say, here's a list of functions you can run.
There's a get info on each shortcut action block that really should have, and I guess I know they have to do one thing at a time, but like if I had a plea for a future version of shortcuts, it would be you got to document all the stuff that the blocks do, and you got to put links to that in the that pop-up, because I calculate expressions. You should be able to do a couple of clicks and get to an Apple documentation page that says, here's what you can do. And it's just not there.
If you pull up my screen again here, Matthew, I've got the info. Here's the info box for calculate. It could actually show up. I don't know if I can do it.
Probably not, actually.
It's a popover. That's too bad. But it literally says, evaluates the mathematical expression in the given input string and outputs the result as a number. That is the entirety of the documentation. Evaluates the mathematical expression. I don't know.
Does math.
How do I feel about math?
It's very literal sometimes. And I mean,
it's a room for it's an opportunity for some new content from Apple. So
totally. Do you remember the world also where this action didn't exist and you had to do like division step by step?
Oh yeah.
It's actually kind of fascinating. So I wrote a story when I worked at Workflow about a person who had like motor disabilities and used shortcuts and those functions in the math calculations to essentially build a program to teach people algebra through shortcuts. And how like it was actually really helpful for a while for me, because it forced me to just rethink about how you do math, because it's like the order of operations is like each step, then you save it, and then you go to the next step. And so it's just like taking those formulas and breaking it out into a shortcut. And I'm sure some of that is why, like, I when I help people on Twitter, I can just like build shortcuts in my head, because I'm just like, this is how all of this stuff is, like, I've been embedded in it. But so with your thing, I mean, also Antonio's in the comments now being like,
oh no,
just format the date. Like, you can't just format the dates. So that was another thing that I was going to say, is it's in the custom field of the format date function. You can do a lot of this.
But you can't convert from a time code. That's the thing. It's getting the right time to have it reflected. Here's the thing: format date takes a date. which makes sense. But what you don't have a date here by default, right? You have a duration.
Exactly.
And in fact, I even spent time trying to figure out there is a convert action in shortcuts for converting measurement, which accepts duration as a type, but I could not figure out how to get anything useful out of it to
That's a
do what
good
I
point.
wanted to do, which would really drove me crazy because like this seems like should be the feature that I want to turn a duration into a time or a timestamp at least, but that's not really what it does.
It probably takes
Anto-
a time already though.
Antonio should be okay. My version of it that Dan is not using yet, I am using the thing I think that Antonio suggested, which is you add the number of seconds to a date that's time code starts at 0000,
Yeah.
and then you format using the adjusted date just in a text field. You format it as oh yeah, there it is. So you can see it there. Add seconds to, in this case, just the beginning of Unix time. Although I think it technically could be any day because all you're really doing is adding the seconds to 000000, and then you can't see the pop-up, but it is a custom date format in the format of K:MM:SS, which will give you 000113 for 1 minute and 13 in.
And why is the K different than the HH?
Otherwise, it'll be 12 a.m.
Yeah, okay.
It'll format it as 0000 will be formatted as 12 a.m. and that's not what you want because it's not really a time.
Yeah.
but it looks like a time and it's actually the time code.
That makes
so
sense.
Antonio, I think, suggested a version of that. He may have suggested the added to the start of current day, which is another way to do it. And they're all about the same number of steps. So
right.
There are lots of ways to skin this cat.
Yeah, the one I have is still, like I said, it's long mainly because I just didn't get around to like re-importing all the decisions that were made, and this one was functional, if not most elegant. And I think
it works.
Replace text there. What does that
so
do?
there is an issue there with padded zeros, right? Like if you have, otherwise you'll just end up with 1. Like it's not a 0. You want 0, 1, right? So basically, I ran through it to make sure all of them, if they are less than 10, get a leading 0. Which
that's
also
what that regular expression does.
Yeah, that's exactly what it does. It takes like a single digit and basically adds pads it with a leading 0.
I wish I had these buttons already because I want to mark that moment because I want to turn that into a subroutine because that's really annoying. And I don't.
It is really annoying, and there's no easy way beyond a regular expression to fix that. Essentially,
this is actually why people like Antonio suggesting using time is the shorter path, because time, all these time formatting things pad the zeros, or at least have an option to pad the zeros.
Right,
whereas if you do the math, which Dan and I both, that was our initial thought, is let's do the math. Now that we have seconds, you can obviously divide by 60 and divide by 3600, and you can do it. But then you also have to pad the zeros,
right?
Which
makes it more clunky. Agreed, for sure. Yeah, and then basically in this case, you got to still, now because they're not a time code still, you got to shove them together with a colon in the middle to make it look like a time code. At which point, then we dump it out with the combined text, which is our string that we've created that's a time code, and the note. And then a thing that I think first was sort of the key to unlocking this idea as a shortcut in my head, literally starting at the end, was, well, I know there's like a ability to just append information to a file. Right? Like, I mean, and Jason, you used, a Unix command essentially, because that's very common. Anybody who's done any sort of terminal work knows it's pretty easy to just add text to a file. That's like 101.
Easy. But yeah, I was trying to do that the other day, and I was like, I have no idea I'm starting from ground zero. So if you guys want to do terminal streams, let's go for it.
Yeah, we'll do that next. I know just enough to be dangerous, is how I always say.
Super thrilling content terminal streams, I think.
But they loved that in 1974. Those were the hot terminal.
You thought the AppleScript samples were bad. Just wait.
Run shell script and shortcuts is bringing it back. I'm trying to.
Yeah, it has a lot of value to it. So at the end here, it just takes it and uses the append. Like I can't remember which is this just the file action at this point, or is there
probably just append?
Yeah, append to text file. So like append to text file, which is basically like, oh, well, that's all we're doing, right? And append to text file will create a file if there is no file already, which is super easy. So you don't have to worry about looking for a file that already exists and making sure you're adding to the same file. And so you just name that file with the creation date, tell what folder to put in. And in my case, I'm sure as with Jason, you put it in the same folder as your audio files, so everything's in a nice, convenient little package. You name it with the creation date. We definitely had an error in there where it was the last modified date. for a little
Yeah.
while, and that was a mistake. So it would make a new file every single time you press the button, which was not good. And even better, it makes a new line for you too, which actually turned out to be a weird issue I had to deal with at some point when inputting stuff. It had to add like a line break, otherwise it was just stuff everything on the same line. So that is kind of where I unlocked it, was saying oh well, hey, I know I can use shortcuts to append something to a file. All I have to do is figure out how to get the information that we're putting in there. So
Totally.
And as Jason said, this is not the most elegant example here. This is a longer, more complex example, but it's relatively simple, all things considered.
Yeah,
I think this is a pretty great shortcut.
Totally. I think the dates stuff are what suddenly makes it become a lot more complicated, but in terms of appending,
we
the in
save...
progress thing is the folder from above, right? Can you
that's my folder where I just keep all my podcast stuff.
I use the desktop like a slob, and Dan is very neat. And
I was using the desktop, but I decided because of iCloud syncing, I didn't want it having to start copying waves as I'm recording them. I was it feels wasteful to have it all synced as I'm recording it and continually adding to it, because Lord knows, I don't know if Apple's rewriting the copies of data every single time that you are adding a bit to it or whatever, but it seems bad.
Some of that's weird. I'm curious too, even with your file name issue, if you had used the variable of this filter files, isn't that just the file itself already versus the folder? And then you wouldn't have to specify the file path?
No, because that file is the WAV file, not the text file.
Okay, good call.
Right. Yes.
So if you use the file name... so actually, I made a couple modifications. If you want to switch over to mine, I can show you. I actually changed...
the podcast note while wars continue.
I want to just see this
they will never
bit.
end.
So did you create the file anywhere else, or just appended file is creating a new one for the first time?
Yeah.
No, appending the appending creates a file if it's not there. So you don't have to worry about... That's one of the great things about that action, is you don't have to worry about checking to see if there's a file or worrying about it overwriting a file. It just adds a line.
Joked about the command line, but that's actually very much a standard command line era behavior, which is if you're appending to a file that doesn't exist, it just creates the file and puts the text in it.
Exactly. I think that's what I was using, and that's very smart. Okay, we're back on yours, Jason.
Okay, so I've done a few things that I haven't even written about, because Dan and I have written so many articles about this, and now things are happening with betas and stuff that we are gonna not need to squeeze out more shortcuts content for a little while. But here's something that I did. So first off, there's a weird thing here where I'm actually having to strip out extra lines from the input, and I only did that because I'm using a method of passing input from a particular kind of command line thing that insists on adding a new line at the end of what it passes. And so I was getting spaces between my notes, and I didn't like that. So I stripped those out. But the big thing here is that I'm using Fantastical shortcut support. So I'm grabbing the upcoming event. That's all. Upcoming event, which includes the current event. And then I'm getting the time between the current date and the start date of that event, and setting a window, which is basically, is it an hour on either side? And I'm experimenting with, or 2 hours on either side. I'm experimenting with this. But the idea here is it's basically looking at my calendar. And if I have a current event, because I mostly calendar my podcasts, they're on there, right?
Yeah.
It sets this variable, and what it's going to do is it's going to name the text file after the event that's currently going on, instead of just calling it note.
Yeah.
Because I just thought that was cool. It's going to be Matt Cassinelli shortcut stream.txt or whatever instead. And then the change that I did at the end of this is, now what happens is at the end of the shortcut, it looks to see if there's a podcast note file already in progress and uses that. And then if there isn't, then it creates the file with the custom name, which is a change because of the custom name thing. But that's it. That's all that I've really done, and using the different math for the date. But it's a surprisingly shortcut to do all these things. It's just that we've been talking all this time because it's that process of figuring out what's the right approach, and maybe
Yeah.
what's the simplest approach
Right.
or the fewest steps approach in order to get to the destination. And yeah, now I'm starting to fiddle around with it and do stuff like give it a custom name.
Yeah. Okay. Fair. Well, it makes sense. I mean, also I think the icons are throwing me off because you're on the beta, and so those are all the file path things now.
I am on the beta.
Nice. So
I just hit Command Return and it accepted my input. That's amazing.
Nice. That's good. Bad.
Oh wait,
What
on
was
the
wrong with
on the pop-up box?
Yeah.
Oh, see, it doesn't do that now, right?
In the beta.
Like,
yeah, it's in the
They
beta.
fixed it.
Oh, see, that was
Jason
the biggest
before.
thing that drove me crazy. Is it wasn't standardized. It should, because
Yeah.
and somebody pointed out that there is, I don't remember what the command is, but like control return or something else will submit it, because the whole point is it's supposed to it defaults to taking multi-line input, and so
Right.
you can't just hit return. But command return didn't work.
I do think it's
because-
command return now, and
It is
Yeah.
command
Return
return
will
now.
do a new line.
Yes.
I do
Yeah.
that in like every app. I'm trying to do a line break, and then I delete the the line and then send it on Twitter like every time because I get the wrong one. I'm just curious, Jason, what is the hour? Is that like from the beginning of this stream, or what is the?
Before we started, I saved out a file to qualify so that I could actually run the script.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's what that is. It's
Sample
it's
version.
just a little file that I made before we got started.
Yeah.
But now I've got a file out on my desktop called Shortcuts Livestream with the text in it.
That makes sense. I'm trying to think even. Oh, Tony in the comments is saying it's function return in the current version.
Function return. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
knew
yeah, of
there
course.
was a version. And I was like, I would never try. In fact, I was just now entering text and trying every combination. I'm like, somebody told me what it was and I can't remember, because I never think of
That's
function
bananas.
as something that modifies return. Yeah, that's super annoying. I'm glad they fixed that, if that's the case, because it was really driving me
return now.
bananas.
I'm trying to process like if there's a way to do this where you didn't have a file created already and you don't have to know exactly when the thing started, like where if I could take this recording once I'm done, look at the start time of that recording or the creation time of that file, and then use it as somehow to reverse engineer my notes
post-process
backwards to that. That's
I'm
like
sure you could do that.
Well,
I could
started
take the
thinking when
difference
we-
between the actual file and then
Yeah. So
yeah,
your
okay,
notes
that
are all
could-
being
that could be
recorded in
easier.
real time with a real time code, and then
I-
you apply it to a particular file,
yeah,
and it
that's actually-
generates out a time code. Yeah.
I did
and
that
I
already.
definitely had a moment where I was thinking as we started this stream, like, is there a way we can get into a format that we could import to Logic and have it automatically edit like markers at the points where you would need to go look for things? And I was like, I wonder if that's,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure if Logic will accept.
No, that's what I was.
a
They don't
text
have any
file.
sort of AppleScript support
You can
at all.
import something from an audio.
Yes.
Yeah, there's no.
Actually, okay,
Yeah.
I did see some of that. It has to be in a pretty specific format. Yeah, we
Yeah,
could do
right.
it.
So you'd have to write to the audio file in some way once done. Once you've finished your notes, you could potentially create a shortcut that writes to the audio file, inserting the line breaks. If you
or
had
it just
a
makes a
tool,
fake audio file.
yeah, exactly.
shortcuts
But you
can
need a
record audio.
tool. All right.
Let's
It's not dead yet. We've
was-
got
let's
more
get
to
through a
do.
little bit of
for
this and then
Logic-
let's try it because
For
we
Logic,
could.
I was thinking you'd want to write it in its like import format, like the same one that it can do to import from Final Cut or something like
That's
that.
what I was
You'd-
thinking.
You'd write an XML file that would contain your audio and
Yeah.
all of your notes, and then import that into Logic. And don't
Oh
do
my
that.
God.
Don't do it.
No, that's. I'm sure your editor would be like, "Please do it, please do it. I don't want to do this." I want to do
That
that,
would
with
be
Final
wild,
Cut
though.
specifically. Like it really. That's exactly why I did this. Is because I had a version that I made with Matt Galligan on a stream where we just saved it into a notes file when you started it, and then each time you hit the button, it'd create a new marker at that moment, and pretty much we did like this same math stuff. Oh yeah, here's the Zoom thing that I was going to show you in a second, but oh my gosh, I just lost my own train of thought. Shoot, I totally forgot what I was going to say now.
We were talking about Final Cut Pro edit points.
Oh
Is
yeah,
that
that's
what you
right.
were-
It's
yeah.
because the point was this is then to take the stream, drop it into Final Cut, and then even put it in the YouTube description, because then it adds the chapter markers automatically.
Yeah,
And for me, it
right.
literally would save hours and hours of post-production. So like,
Sure.
this is, even though it's
Do it.
silly, like it is madness. This I did it with Zoom, where in Zoom comments, if they leave comments, it creates a timestamp file afterwards, and then I could convert all these into edit points like this throughout.
Yeah, nice.
So, and I want to show you to this.
Well, and if you've got a standard format for it, like where it always says chapter marker, you can also filter, right? So that you can put your chapter markers in, but leave your comment that somebody swore out.
Yeah, exactly. Totally, with like the menu thing. And I want to get to that next, also your Stream Deck part. This is, I think though, Timery Joe Rebar, which I actually know how to say his last name now, has an action called format duration that I think does exactly this. So
really,
yeah, that was the other thing, was I put it in my newsletter, but I was like, so you did all this great work, but Joe made it irrelevant because he can just do it in a second.
This is a challenge covering this stuff. It's just like Dan. I mean, I challenged Dan about his Python thing because I thought, can we do this inside shortcuts without any extra third-party apps in order to do this
dependencies?
Sort of thing.
That's the thing. You want to avoid the situation where it's like, well, this works, but only if you go get this other app, right? Or only if you have this command line tool installed on your
like Toolbox
system.
Pro is great, but I always hesitate to use Toolbox Pro because then I have to assume everybody else has bought Toolbox Pro.
Totally.
Yeah. Anything for your personal use, fine, whatever tools you need to get the job done, I feel like. But for Jason and I, who spend so much time writing about stuff and trying to share it with folks who are like maybe just starting out with shortcuts, you don't want to necessarily force them to go get something like that. Let them find that for themselves, and mention there is this tool that is handy for this if you want to keep going with this.
It does. I just feel
the real
bad
moment
because
yeah, the real moment that unlocked it for me. I really, that transformative moment is when somebody said it formatted as a time from the start of the day. Like that is so brilliant, because at that point, once it's in, and you can use that time formatting system where you're literally, it's straight out of Python or the command line where you're using the RFC standard, like how do I do date formatting, then you can make it exactly what you want. What Dan and I wanted is to go straight from seconds to date formatting, and shortcuts won't do that. But as long as you're adding it from 000000 of any day, you can then use the date formatting, and it works okay.
Yeah. I'm trying to see if
unless your recording is more than a day long, in which case, stop. What are you doing?
I was very curious when you're talking about the hour before and after. I was like, is that going to work for the talk show? Probably not, because if you're 2.5 hours in,
that's your own limits.
I was trying to sit there thinking, like, what if I was recording? I often record late at night because I'm on the East Coast, and I'm recording at like 10 or 11. It's like, oh God, what if it goes over the day limit? Is that going to mess with things?
Yeah.
Like, it's a new day now. That's
right.
I have yet to run into that as an issue, but it's something in the back of my mind.
Could happen.
I think this is where even like Joe did, like the variables on here are what's really good.
Those are really good. That's pretty cool. Frankly,
this is
Apple
where I
needs
was
a
like
format
just
duration action of its own.
Yeah,
but I'm sure they don't really care.
Yeah, but that's why I was like, the other one also, Jason, I did notice you used. Did you try get upcoming events using shortcuts? Because there is a built-in action for that, but does it not get the current one?
I don't. Saw that. So I don't use the standard calendar.
Oh.
Yeah, I was looking at that from my options because I am a calendar user, and I was like, I wonder if I could basically make my own version of that with calendar, and I saw that action was in there. So in theory, sure.
Yeah, and you can specify which calendar. I don't think I have this on here,
which would be
poor planning on my part, I guess.
Probably work for us because we have most of my podcasts are on. They're not all on the same calendar. I would need to probably do several.
And it looks like shortcuts and calendar are actually seeing the same thing, so I could probably get that from calendar, the current event in calendar too.
Yeah. So the other thing was the Stream Deck and the options, and that was the point. One of the points that hung me up for a while. Here, let me make sure everybody's okay. That's showing everything.
Yep.
Cool. Because I wanted that exact thing of a cough, a swear, a good moment, like a clip versus edit points, and that was even where like I just hadn't done it, and I don't do it that often, and I liked how in your articles you were just like, it didn't survive the first test. I needed these options in it.
I was really trying to figure out, and there's no way until you do it, to figure out a way to reduce the cognitive load on me, because again, my feeling is that Mike Hurley, because he's so pen and paper oriented anyway. Him taking notes with pen and paper is natural for him, but it would totally, I've tried it and it's super distracting for me because I'm very bad at that. And I thought pushing buttons on a computer I'm really good at. Maybe I should do that. But the first attempt I had to do this was throwing up a dialog box or a set of buttons that I would have to click. And it was too much because I'm on the Stream Deck and then I'm moving to the screen and I'm using my cursor or I'm typing and I'm hitting return.
And you can't hit enter. You have to click. So it's 3 different inputs. I totally get
Right.
it.
So I was using Keyboard Maestro so I could hit enter because I was bypassing that and then just passing the input because I didn't want to deal with it. So what I decided to do for my second round, and this has been more successful, is create a bunch of buttons on the Stream Deck. So this is my home in the Stream Deck, and I'm going to go into my podcast section here. I got a bunch of different macros going on here, but down in the bottom left corner, these two, one of them is the plus symbol. The plus symbol opens up the please tell me how your podcast guest hurt you, and then you type something in and hit return or command return or whatever you want to do. The other one, though, if I press that, it takes me to another layer in the Stream Deck where I've got a bunch of different options. If I keep my finger right on the button I just pressed and press it again, that's the plus. It just adds the time code and nothing else. So it's a completely thought-free press.
Nice.
If I want to have and keeping in mind that my eyes are looking at the Stream Deck, my hand is on the Stream Deck, I'm trying to make it as low a amount of thought on my part as possible. So I'm given a little menu of items here, which are crosstalk, which is the X, and there's a noise, and there's swearing, and there's a tech problem, and there's something I need to cut out, or there's a chapter marker. And so at this point, I can press one of those and it will run the script. And if we go in to chapter marker here, you'll see in Stream Deck it's called a multi-action because it actually needs to run the script and then go back to the previous page.
Nice.
So it's got to do both of those things. And the script that it's running is tell application shortcuts events to run the shortcut named podcast note with input chapter marker. That's it. So every one of these things is a copy of all the other ones, and the only thing that's different is the input.
Yeah.
Now,
awesome.
There is a shortcuts plugin for Stream Deck. I talked to the guy who wrote it and said, you should really have an option to pass input. And he said, you're right, I'll put that on the list. And so at some point, this might get replaced with run shortcut, where I just put the input in there. But same diff. It does it all the same, which is what it's really doing is all of those buttons are going to pass some custom input to the shortcut. And that means that I can, without typing, a lot of this stuff I can just do without typing. I can just go, there's a swear, take it out. And I don't have to think about it. I don't have to click a button on my screen. I can just very quickly do it with my fingers on the Stream Deck and my eyes on the Stream Deck.
And so originally this just triggered your Apple script that did all the functions and wrote it to the file.
So when I was tinkering around with the Fantastical stuff, I realized that I wasn't going to do that in AppleScript and that I was going to need to switch over. So I had still been using my AppleScript because I had written it and it hadn't diverged from what Dan had done. And then that was the moment where I'm like, okay, I got to be all in on shortcuts. So I had to change from running the AppleScript to, which is functionally very similar, right? It's literally just passing input to a different place.
Yeah.
Because both of them accepted input. And so now I just changed that last week. So now it runs this brief AppleScript script. It could also have done a shell command that works the same way that you could do it using shortcuts run in the shell. But Stream Deck, there isn't a shell plugin. There's an AppleScript plugin, or an OSA script plugin. So the easiest thing to do is just
run a shell script through the.
Yes, I could have also done do shell script shortcuts run, and it would have done exactly the same thing. I didn't.
I wonder if you can't just. I mean, I assume you could get it into a loop where it just tries to run the script that runs the shortcut that runs the script, and it's just like freaks out. And
then your Stream Deck catches on fire, which is not great. Avoid that.
That's no good.
So Dan, you don't have a Stream Deck though, right?
I do actually have a Stream Deck,
okay.
But it's just currently mine's only set up to do the sort of using the shortcuts plugin, as Jason mentioned. It basically just runs the default version, which pops up the dialog box. I haven't gotten into the whole specifying for all the different use cases. Mainly because I think the biggest cognitive overload I have, as Jason said, is just remembering to use this at all.
Mhm.
Like that
True.
that is the biggest problem, is like you're so, in part because, especially if you're someone who is on a, running a podcast and you're engaged in the running of that podcast, you have to split your focus, right? It's like I'm talking to people and I'm trying to maintain a conversation, but
Totally.
also I need to go press this button and think about what just happened. And that to me is the biggest challenge. So I haven't yet gotten to the point of like trying to build out the whole thing because I just haven't used it enough. But I'm definitely, having now seen how Jason has everything set up, I'm like, yeah, I should do that.
Yeah, exactly.
all
I
set.
mean, it makes sense.
I mean, in the end, it's just about what's going to tax your brain the least. And
Right.
I'm not sure I've got it all the way yet, but I'm trying to think like if I can make it so that when somebody coughs, I can just go boop boop, and I know that it's going to do that every time. If I can internalize that while I'm trying, because you're not just talking, you're not just on a podcast, but if you're hosting it, you're trying to guide a conversation.
Yeah.
And like there's so much else going on. You're not just having a conversation, but you're knowing where you are and what else and who hasn't spoken, and there's so much you're juggling that you add more overload to it and it can be too much. But the goal is to make it as simple as possible, which is why I think passing input has got so much potential, because then you're hitting the swear button.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
you don't have to type swear or move your pointer on your screen to click on the button that says swear. You just go boop boop, and you know that it's handled, and you don't have to think about it. And that's the goal of all of this, right? Is just to use automation to make it so that we aren't having to do the pick up my pen, is it clicked, look at the paper, put down what's the time code, it's already 5 seconds past what it was, put it in, and then this
that information.
And then you have a piece of paper to manage, and it's like, well, now I've got to either use this as my edit list,
take a picture
or I've
of
got
that, email it to Steven. Steven does the edit. Exactly.
Do the live text copy, hold my phone over it, copy the text that I've written.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I wonder if you could even then just like finish the entire thing and send it off to the editor all in one go. And it is just like that flow makes a huge difference. I'm even just like, I mean, I'm literally doing it right now. So like, it's like having those chapter markers through here would have helped, and just clicking the button. I mean, I just noticed that I'll switch to my one up real quick, but like I just have my hands like on my Stream Deck ready to go in order to hit these buttons, and that's what makes a big difference.
Yeah, I think that's the idea. And although, I mean, the Stream Deck, part of the appeal of the Stream Deck is that it's got the customizable buttons on it, and it's got the different layers, and that's all good. But part of it is that it is depending on which one you've got, it's a certain finite number of buttons, and you can do it a little bit by feel too. So that's the other part of it is you've got your thumb on the bottom left for this. That's absolutely what I'm doing, and I know that if I press that twice without looking, it's just going to put a time code in there, and I know that if I go there and then one over, I'm going to get the chapter marker, and I'm hoping that will internalize it even more.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I saw like some people poking fun at you guys for like writing about this so much, but it is like, this is your core workflow, and it makes a huge difference. Like I know that especially for what I'm going to try to use it for streams is just once it becomes 3 hours and stuff like that, is just any time going back through that is a waste of time.
Yeah.
Or the listeners want those chapter markers right away too. So like,
and Shortcuts is new on the Mac, and I think we know that most people, I mean, we did write this, I think, knowing that our colleagues were going to look at it, and several have and are like, oh God, I got to start using this, right? Where they picked it up. And that's gratifying because we wrote it for us. But I think the larger point is start thinking about shortcuts as ways to solve problems on the Mac. And if all that anybody walks away from that shortcuts article, or those 4 shortcuts articles that we've done so far, is filtering folders in the Finder using shortcuts is super easy. That's what I need to use.
Yeah.
Or writing out to a text file or appending to a text file. Like, it's the individual details, I think, that are what's important there, because most people are not going to be doing a podcast note workflow, but I hope that gets them thinking about how to use shortcuts on the Mac to solve their own problems.
Yeah. And the larger context of it as well, I think, of just realizing I do this thing all the time. And then this is what you do, Matt. Like, this is like, I do this thing all the time. Is there a way that this could be easier? Oh, wait, they're using this for notes. Could I use this for some other thing that I'm doing all the time? Right. Like
Yeah.
that's, you want to save time at the end
Yeah,
of the day.
maybe it's
This
your
is-
Zoom call. Maybe you're you're doing meetings and somebody's supposed to take notes of the meeting. I used to work for a nonprofit and somebody's supposed to take notes. You could apply something like this to that, where you're able to press a button and do something, and maybe it's just based on the clock and not about an arbitrary start time, but it's like an easier way to take notes during your meeting.
Yeah, totally.
That would be fine, right? Like, there's lots of things. The whole goal of user automation is just, these computers are dumb. They should do this work for me.
Totally.
That's what it is.
I know that's what I was gonna. I forgot to mention it because you were like, I'm outsourcing my workflow to my editor, and I was like, you're also outsourcing it to shortcuts because then you just don't have to do that work.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
100%.
another thing, even I'm seeing some comments about like Stream Deck is the dedicated hardware thing that can be an issue, and also just another. Somebody was saying it is passed out to a timestamp in a doc so that you can edit it later. That's how this works. But at least what I'm just noticing, I realized this over the weekend, you might not need a Stream Deck because of universal control, because you can literally just go over and press it on your iPad and then go back to your computer. And I was like, dang, that's pretty slick. Like, I like the Stream Deck especially, but even on a MacBook with an iPad next to you, you don't have to be at a desktop at all. And so
I mean, you
it
can use
be really
hotkeys or
powerful.
whatever too,
Yeah,
right?
use
It's just like
F keys.
hotkeys. You just got to remember them then, right? Like the virtue of the Stream Deck
Yeah.
is you know what button you need to press, whereas a hotkey's like,
Exactly.
wait, was coughing Command Shift Control Option 1 or
Yeah.
Command Shift Control
Totally.
Option 2?
It's function.
function
Yeah.
return
Oh.
option command.
Obviously, if your keyboard has the function key, even
Touch
Yeah,
ID
Or
and
globe.
That's or you don't need to use a Stream Deck. You could also use a macro pad, or you could just remember the shortcuts on your keyboard.
bar.
All of those are valid. Like, this is not a solution that requires any particular hardware. Stream Deck was kind of my
I think
muse here a little bit, because I was like, I've got a Stream Deck. I want to use it for stuff like this, where it's like, that's why I got a Stream Deck, is literally those moments where I thought to myself, is it Shift Command Control 1
Yeah.
or is it Shift Option Control 1 or Shift Option Command 1? It's like, it's too complicated. And now
Yeah.
I've got a little button that says press me. It's like, okay,
Yeah,
but you could do it
exactly. I
any
mean,
old way you want.
and especially the part about it switches back to the other profile from once you insert the thing. That's really big.
Or use Keyboard Maestro and make a palette. You could do that too if that
Yeah.
works with your brain more. You could have a little floating palette with swear and sound or whatever your notes are, and then just click them, and the Keyboard Maestro would pass that input to the shortcut.
possibilities are endless.
Do you still
Yeah.
use the launch bar one? Does that still work, or with that?
Launch
takes the
Bar
second.
one doesn't work, or does work. Launch Bar, for people who use that, and Alfred also will do this, will pass input to a shortcut. So you can run a shortcut, but if you, in Launch Bar, it's you select it and then you press space bar, and you get a field that you can pass input. And I don't use it for this because the Stream
The
Deck is,
overhead.
I think, a better flow, but I have a shortcut that searches 6 colors using the WordPress search API, because we're on WordPress, and gives me back 5 selections, and then I choose one, and it puts a markdown link to that on the clipboard. And that one I use in Launch Bar. That's how I use it. Is I open that 6 color search shortcut in Launch Bar and then type my search query.
Yeah,
So
that's awesome.
I just do it all from there, and it's passing the input through. And similarly, now that in the next beta it's going to be easier to use the keyboard, or I guess currently if you hit function return, you might not actually have to use Launch Bar to pass the input, because you could just wait for the shortcut to ask for the input. But
Yeah.
it's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. It's nice to have
It's
a
still-
shortcut that can do both.
Exactly. I mean, I'm clearly a maximalist with shortcuts, and it's just like I like to be able to do it in any form, because then I can when I need to, and if that function isn't available where I'm set up, I can still do it. No matter
It's
what.
really useful to be able to say, get input from the shortcut, and if there's not input, ask for input, right? Like it's right there at the top.
Oh my god, that saved me so many instances of reusing that set, or like the if and all that get device detail stuff too. Is so nice too. Like,
right.
those
Yeah.
quality of life things. The quality of life is so much better. for me than it was a few years ago with shortcuts, which is
Every time
fantastic
I'm
though.
every time I am picking something out using a magic variable, and I remember that you
Oh
used to
yeah,
have to explicitly set every variable, I'm like, oh
I
god.
mean, yeah, I still
yeah.
see a lot of people on Reddit do that constantly, and I'm like, your shortcut could be about a third as long as you've
Right.
made
I
it.
also just the naming, like little things like naming variables, which somebody pointed out when I did like, in my shortcut where I had stuff named hours, minutes, seconds. It's because like I have three things that are calculated expression. It's like
Yeah, I do that all
that
the
was
time.
how I literally mixed them up, was trying to remember, okay, which of these was the seconds, which of these was the hour. And like, it's so much as somebody who comes from a brief programming background. Naming variables is like is like day one stuff,
Yeah,
and you're like,
Yeah.
I wish I could do this because it makes it so much easier to just have somebody else look at a shortcut and be like, oh, I understand what you're doing here.
totally. That's what
And
you
Dan,
lose that with magic
what I
variables.
like about your shortcut, and I mentioned earlier that you're saving the current date when the shortcut runs, so that it is the time code at the moment you started the script, and not the time code when you press enter. Um, that is a great example of why sometimes you still do want to manually set a variable, because you want to
Absolutely.
Yeah,
set variable
totally.
of current time at the very top of the shortcut, so that
Yeah.
when you get it later, you're not getting the current time later, you're getting the current time
Right.
at the start, which is
Because
just very clever.
the biggest issue was that it waited for the dialogue to complete, and it's like it could take you a 10 seconds to formulate like, what do I want to type in this dialogue, and all of a sudden your time code is 10 seconds off.
Yeah.
So
Or even longer if you were
yeah,
actually talking to somebody during that, and then you go
you got
back and you type
distracted.
what you were
Yeah.
meaning to type, and you
Yeah.
want that to be coded to the moment that you press the button.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, I'm seeing some comments that's like, how did we get through this stuff? And I mean, even in workflow, it was like barely even there. So it's been a process, but I think these levels just make it so much better. And I think that's why technically you could have done some of this stuff in the past, but now it's all brought together on the platform where people are doing production work, especially, and just the hardware of something like a Stream Deck is what makes it instantly available to you and zero processing and then all of this value right away. And so like I
Yep.
think this stuff is very, very cool.
And going back to what we said right at the very beginning about AppleScript and Automator, like AppleScript, everybody who uses AppleScript loves it and hates it, I think, except for Sal. Sal Sigonian, I'm sure, just loves it. But it's got lots of issues. But what we love about it is that it provided you with the ability to do things like say, I'm going to look at a folder and I'm going to get exactly the right file that matches, and then I can do magical stuff with it. And the beauty of that moment where Dan said, I just did it as a shortcut, and you look at how simple it is as a shortcut.
Totally.
I think for anybody who's been on the Mac a long time, it is, anytime I try to give somebody an Apple script, they're like, what are you doing? Like, why are you doing this to me? And I feel like shortcuts are not easy, but they're so much more understandable. And part of that is just the interface, and part of that is the idea that it's abstracted from like app control so often
Yeah.
that it's literally like, can you show me some files, instead of tell application finder, now we use the finder dictionary to do this, which is just so
Yeah.
much harder to understand.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
one of the things that's exciting about projects like this, is that it shows you that Mac users now have the ability to do this stuff that I think previously a lot of them would be like, no, forget it, I can't,
I mean,
like,
yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
going to even
Like,
try.
me,
Yep.
for example, like I don't ever, I
Yeah.
mean, like I will use AppleScript now if I find someone else's and can make it work, but I don't want to like
It's the
relearn
story of
that from
AppleScript right
scratch.
there, is find someone else's AppleScript. Yep.
Yeah. I forgot too, Dan, you had the podcast sorter.
Oh yeah, that was an additional thing that I'm still kind of working on that. But
Just a little.
essentially, the idea is for me, as I mentioned, like I moved everything into that in progress folder for when I'm recording stuff, and then what I wanted to do was get it out
Oh.
and essentially say like, so I have like a podcast folder, and that podcast has subfolders. Podcast folder has subfolders for each of my shows. I have one for Clockwise, one for the Rebound, one for Incomparable, etc. And so I wanted to basically say, well, I'm storing all the in progress stuff in a single folder, but once I've finished recording, I want those files to be grabbed and then moved into the appropriate subfolder, because I otherwise I end up with this sort of littered folder full of files that are essentially temporary, on their way to being edited or on their way to being provided to somebody else. And so I was like, well, I wonder if I can do this with a shortcut since we're on a shortcuts kick here. And the answer is, yeah, I actually did find a way. I haven't worked out all of the kinks yet. I've definitely noticed now that I've been using that more regularly, that there are some other things I need to do to sort of refine it a little bit further. And I had to make some adjustments to other parts of my workflow so that the data was kind of nice. But essentially, it sort of skims through those files in the in progress and tries to figure out, okay, I see there's 3 files here that were all recorded today at the same time, roughly. Let me grab those, let me put them in a folder, and then let me sort of suss out from that which podcast, depending on how they're named, which podcast they're for, and then move it to the appropriate subfolder with some sort of identifying information.
That's great, though. That's so
yeah,
nice.
no, it's really cool and mostly works in shortcuts. The biggest issue I ran into I needed in addition was I used the tool Hazel by Noodlesoft because you need an action to sort of kick it off, but Hazel lets you run a shortcut now as an action.
Yeah,
so I could just tell it, hey, keep an eye on this folder, and anytime you see like there's a bunch of new files there that aren't being actively modified, run this shortcut on the folder, and then the shortcut just takes care of the rest of it. So I'm using Hazel as sort of a kickoff to look at a folder and be like, yep, now it's time to run that shortcut.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, no, it works pretty well. I think the biggest issue is just sort of like there's always little inconsistencies I need to iron out in terms of like making sure files are named correctly so it can figure out which subfolder things go into and all that. But the idea is sound and makes it so that I can have everything. And again, another place where it's like the computer, why do I have to figure out like, okay, I finished recording, I went in, I got those files, I created a new subfolder, I filed it in the correct subfolder. It's like, that's just me wasting time that a computer could figure out. A computer can figure out as just as well as I can which folder this stuff is supposed to end up in. So that's something I'm playing around with. And I know Jason and I have both done stuff in the past with like archiving old, podcast files and stuff like that, where it's just like make work. That's like, yeah, I could take the time and go through and archive a bunch of folders when I need to clear off file space, but wouldn't it be so much better if those files were getting automatically archived and I just never need to worry about it?
Yeah, and that's stuff that you could do in Hazel too, but you like you were saying in your article, it's just you just end up with like 30 rules. And
yeah, it was way more complex, and shortcuts allows you to sort of get into the power of like making decisions much more in a much more compact and understandable fashion without having to navigate the kind of thing I was looking for before, which was I got to navigate a whole bunch of like and or conditions to figure out which are the right files here.
Yeah. I love Hazel, but Hazel has a real automator vibe to me, where it's like, why can't it do this? Why have I run up against this thing? Can I get around it? And so having Hazel, like what I love about Hazel is the simple stuff, which is, can you look at this folder and see if something changed? And if so, then do something with that. Like how Dan's using it as a trigger. Yep. But below that, its level of sophistication kind of falls apart pretty fast.
But still, I mean, it sounds like maybe their idea was always just to kick off an Apple script at that point, and like now that shortcuts is better,
it can be a shell script.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I mean, it does other stuff too, but I mean, and I think what this also points out is the lack of like automation triggers on the Mac side too. In terms of there's some ability on iOS to have automations for shortcuts, personal automations, where it's like this happens at this time or whatever. I don't think most of that functionality is there on the Mac side yet.
At all.
Yeah, and there's no right, and moreover to the point that like it doesn't allow for the kind of things that Hazel can do, where it's like watch a folder, right? That in Hazel, that's very simple to say watch a folder, and it feels like if you are going to have shortcuts on the Mac that has automation triggers, you need to have Mac specific automation triggers, right?
Yeah,
like
definitely. I mean, most of the
I would do that. Yeah, you're right. Nowadays, most of that stuff works on iOS, like could work on iOS. You could watch a folder in files on iOS, and that would be great. But there are definitely people who are like, well, but then it's running and does it run down my battery? You don't have to worry about that as much on a Mac, right? Like
exactly. I just wouldn't want to do that. Like I do think though, like Hazel is like, well, especially Apple clearly said that as this is part of the transition, and so all these tools already exist and people can do that. I wish we had gotten automations first, but it's even still, if we got automations right away, I wouldn't even know what to do with them yet. So like it does take time for us too, and then these other apps, they don't just want to Sherlock them as well and do exactly what Hazel does. And now to me, Hazel seems like it's more clear that Hazel is what you use to do that monitoring, and then you just run shortcuts to like do the more complicated parts.
Well,
It's like it
also
makes it
there's
more
the
useful.
lesson. They may have learned the lesson of like, because there are folder action scripts in Mac OS. It's still a
Right.
thing. You
Yeah.
can do it to process. But maybe a new version of that would be good. But
It's probably through
it was
shortcuts.
not well used and not well maintained, and something like Hazel is a better fit. So, yeah.
I'm curious. It'll be all those just additions, and I mean, there's stuff like Shortery now that can, or I don't even. There's been so many Mac tools that are actually really good that I was thinking of. Wait, is it ShareBot or what's the one that does the share sheet thing? But there's a bunch of different shortcuts adjacent Mac tools that can let you basically gives you automations. I haven't even really gotten too far with Signals for HomeKit, but that one is wild. I don't know if you two have seen it, that you can have shortcuts run in response to HomeKit events, like actual real shortcuts. I mean, it has to run on your Mac at all times.
Sure.
But it's like when you open your door, you can run a shortcut on your Mac or something like
Sure.
that. So it's like flashes the recording light, or I don't know, all of this. So there is like that potential is so fun, but also you need to get your work done first, which is why these ones are really good.
Yeah, and there's not to get all kind of like Merlin Man on you a little bit, but it's that you do have to gauge like how much of it is a pursuit of it because it's fun and how much of it is a pursuit of it to save time. And I'm a real believer in the you put the time in and you get more time out kind of thing. It is fun to do, but you can fall down a rabbit hole where you're not actually saving yourself any time. You're just doing it because it's fun. And if it's your hobby, then that's great.
Yeah,
But
knock
I like
yourself
to
out.
try and calibrate it of like, will I get out more than I put into this? And
Yeah.
if the answer is yes, then I do it. So like, for example, you mentioned the thing that I've thought of a million times, which is a recording light outside my door that says I'm recording. I'm like, oh, and it'll be able to look at the file and know that Audio Hijack is recording to the desktop, and it'll use HomeKit, and it'll turn on a light, and it's going to be great. And then I think, you know what I have? I have a plastic door hanger, like from a hotel, that I put on the outside of the door when I'm recording, and my family knows not to come in, and that's all that I need. Like
but
that's enough.
That's the blessing of being able to write about it, and then suddenly it's worth
I need it for
now.
my work.
Yeah, exactly. But I feel like that's not that far away from being doable. Even with Signals, it's like you just need the hardware.
Oh, I've
like
definitely had that. I've definitely had the same thought. It was like, I wonder if I could rig like an on-air light. I did so far as like Googling. Yeah, I know you could. I just like, again, it got that got into a hardware problem more than anything. It's like, I got to get a light.
Exactly.
I got to hook it up. I got to figure out a way to run. Yeah,
plug it in.
Software is easy.
Easy.
Hardware is hard.
Nice. I feel like this is pretty much everything. I mean, I was trying to think of like just the additions in terms of other edit types, but I guess you had most of like crosstalk, swearing, having the freeform field so you could just enter something in.
Right, and if you wanted to, you could construct an interface where it actually gives you a list that you could pick from. It depends on how you wanted to do it. Yeah.
Or like, I'm probably. I am in this world where I will make separate shortcuts instead of doing a menu. Like this, it's kind of like the Stream Deck option, but just also in shortcuts. And then I put it on a widget on my home screen and things like that.
Yeah.
But I have 2,000 shortcuts now because of that. So.
Well, right. I mean, what you really want, and this is a direction for iOS maybe in the future too, is it would be awfully nice if you could have something that is an input passer that is passing particular input to a particular shortcut that isn't literally a shortcut that does that. Like, wouldn't that be nice if you could if you could save out onto your home screen on iOS something that ran a shortcut with a particular kind of input, but
with an input. Well,
right, because
you could make separate shortcuts, I guess.
But that would be what you'd have to do is you just have an input passer. At least it would mean that you only needed one master shortcut and all your other little shortcuts are just input passers. But I don't know.
Or your little Apple script system, we could. I feel like it's very close because I will just tease now because I have been working on something similar where I'm trying to basically get. Is this going to work? It's going to show. Okay, hold on. Let me switch to my desktop. I had some of these. Hide my Twitter. I have a folder of shortcuts here because these are all in the Finder, and they're just the add to doc, the shortcut dot application thing. And so that was like my same idea, is you could just click here and then be like cough thing.
Yeah,
And
totally.
This is where I got into the terminal, because I was this order is in reverse, like it only sorts in one direction, and so I had to go in and like, I don't know if it's touch, or I don't even remember where I ended up, but like then just tap each of the files to adjust the dates in the correct by matching it up with the folder order in my shortcuts.
That's wild. That is a above and beyond sort of
This is what I feel like it's the same problem though, of just like, how do I write this and make it functional so that somebody else can just take this and use it? Because I think that's what is hard about even the podcast workflow. Just this whole thing is conceptualizing what it actually means versus like the whole how it all works is super fascinating. But in practice, it's just like you're just adding timestamps to a file, and then your editor can go. That's like what I can't remember. I can only remember his YouTube name right now. Bearded Teacher. This question was just like, what do you actually do with those? And so I feel like the part about importing it. I mean, do you want to look up the logic file thing real quick? Because it could be possible.
Looked at it briefly while we were talking, and I was like, it's kind of a mess, because I think that essentially, I think as you said, it's like a Final Cut Pro. Like
it's an XML import. Yeah.
And the format is a little.
Speaking of XML, Jason, okay, I want your WordPress shortcut, if you don't mind, your WordPress API thing, because you getting me into those XML posts, first of all, you saved my whole shortcuts catalog, and it's the worst thing in the world, because I'm making XML file. It took me so long to figure out, but I got it, except for I can't figure out like my weird custom fields and an array of items.
So
it's so close to being perfectly automated,
here's
though.
What I'll tell you, because we have this thing that uses XML RPC that used to be to movable type, and now is to 6 colors. It's on WordPress, so it's there. I think the right thing to do is I think there's a JSON REST API for WordPress that you should use instead, because then you can just make it a dictionary. I had this revelation the other day, which is it's really great that I moved from movable type to WordPress and had to change almost nothing about my workflow, because I'm still using the XML RPC interface. And it's great. Yeah. I use it all the time. I think Dan uses it sometimes too. It's great.
I think because
there's a JSON interface that's more modern, and my thought process was, wouldn't it be great if shortcuts spoke XML? But it speaks JSON, because JSON is way more modern than XML. And I'm sure there's probably an app that will do shortcuts extensions for XML or something. But the right answer is use JSON and then use the JSON interface to post to WordPress. Yeah. That's the answer.
Yeah. I think my plugin, or even just the fact that you had already done it and it worked, I was like, I need this to work. So that's
expediency really does win out sometimes, doesn't it?
Or it's the other thing is, I think every 3 shortcuts, I think my server just fails because it's trying to process XML RPC instead of something. So I'm adding in like wait times just so that it does that. Yeah, that's pretty wild. But I do.
I saw that Federico wrote about how he has a shortcut to post to WordPress for Mac Stories, and I was like, oh, I wonder how he's doing it. And I looked, and it's like he's using the WordPress app. I was like, oh,
I also wondered about that. Yeah,
that's interesting.
Possible.
Or just the post to WordPress action, you mean, or
yeah, that's what I mean. The post to WordPress action, which
did not work throughout all of the betas. Oh boy, that was right when I needed it 100% most of the time, and it barely got fixed after like 2 versions. So some of that stuff is like, that's why I had to do the XML RPC, because it just didn't work at all, and I needed to post like 600 shortcuts.
And the reason that XML RPC approach worked at all is because I was using movable type, which is so old that there's no app for it, and there's no way to post. It's like, how do I post from my iPad to the website without just opening up a browser window? And I ended up with building my own version of MarsEdit, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I was like hitting him up trying to figure out. What's so frustrating is I know that I literally like figured out how to like itemize an array the way that it needs to in XML RPC, but it's just because I'm using a plugin, they like either don't support it, or like it might need the specific IDs or something, and then it's like a weird company that doesn't actually document their stuff too. So you're getting far out there, but also it works. And so I was just like, it's glorious for me, and it works on the Mac too. It doesn't have a dependency on that post to WordPress action actually working, which is I'm removing my own shortcuts dependencies.
Yeah, no, it's good. Oh, but so the answer to the bearded teacher, Stephen Robles, is that the text file goes to my editor. That's the answer. When I send him the files to edit, I also send him the text file. And if I have any comments, I will say, look specifically for this thing. Or I'll even open up the text file and elaborate on what that little note was, so that he's armed with that. And then he does with it what he wants.
Totally. And Stephen, I humbly apologize. And I know that he's the Apple Insider podcast editor. So he's watching this being like, give me these shortcuts because it'll save him time too. So I feel like that's a perfect example. So I feel like the logic thing is probably wild. I think I'm going to try it at some point just because I see it is just a text file, and it's the same. All you need is a text action and then put what you put into that file and then import it. So it could be fairly simple.
If you XML in a text action, everybody loves it.
Yeah. If you could end up with like markers in Logic where it just like has little chapter markers and that's like, oh, look for a coffee, like that would be kind of incredible, just because the additional speed with which it adds, like you don't have to scroll back and forth and check your file.
See, then you gotta add Stream Deck keys to press the keyboard shortcut to go to the next marker.
Yeah,
I'm not even joking. I would do that. Also,
before we go, I want to shout out to Antonio Bueno, by the way, who on Twitter sent us a shortcut that does what Dan needed, which is format the date as optionally how many days you've been recording. So
perfect.
Very helpful.
Oh God, let's hope it doesn't come to that.
It's the best episode of the talk show ever.
I will say
28 hours long.
Seriously. Just constant Gruber. The other thing I want to just say for you guys is the Stream Deck Mini is actually really good in addition to the Stream Deck, and some of that mental processing stuff actually helps to have a second thing. That this one's just the buttons, and this one is I've been using the mute key just on this side the whole time, and that's been really nice. Or those I have programmed in arrow keys and the enter button so I can use my shortcuts menus from the Stream Deck still and things like that. So I'm going to get everybody in the Apple community to buy all the versions of the pedals too.
It's wild.
It's awesome. So.
There's going to be a wheel. It's going to be like a car. It's going to be like hitting pedals and steering and all this stuff. And
I have
going to be shortcuts.
Did you ever see the Zoom button? It was a red button to end your Zoom call. I have it, and I'm trying to reprogram it just to be a shortcut button, but it's also very, very loud.
we got movie sign.
Yeah, exactly. All right, I feel like this was awesome. I really appreciate you guys coming on and explaining it. Jason, I do want your WordPress search your JSON API.
Oh yeah, sure.
If you don't mind, because that would be really helpful. But then otherwise, I want to get my own version set up too, and I want to like share the Stream Deck profile too, because I feel like that's a thing that people can just download and add. If you guys don't mind, also, like I feel like I just want to collaborate and do those back and forths, and that kind of stuff is great. So
great.
No, it's helpful. It's nice to have other people to like sort of bounce ideas off of, because I think that was one of the best experiences for Jason and I, was just like sending different iterations back and forth and being like, wait, what if we do this? And the other person be like, no, what if we do this? And you'd be like, oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, that was always my favorite part of programming too.
And totally, especially with shortcuts, like I'd love to have you guys on anytime. If you ever want to come on a stream to talk about a thing, I'd love to do it, or build these things. Even, I don't know if I've been using the Shortcuts user group Discord, and their threads are actually really good if you actually use a thread instead of just the fire hose, because you can like get that back and forth. Antonio, I'm not gonna lie, I'll be like, hey Antonio, can you do this regex for me? And he does it every time because he's amazing. And so it is very helpful, and that's kind of a fun way to share this stuff. If you guys ever want to like work on it there too instead of a stream. But yeah, this is cool. I like it.
Thanks.
I'm gonna have to. I wish I'd set it up for real before, because now I'm gonna have to go back and add chapter markers to the stream. But that's okay. I'll do it in practice. Yeah, exactly. For the last time, that is good. Cool. Well, I feel like this is pretty good. I'm gonna stick around for a couple minutes and look back through the comments and answer anything. But you guys are good to go and head out if you want. But thanks for being on. Do you want to promote your stuff that you do?
6colors.com.
Yep. there it is. Everything else feeds through there, I guess. So
Yeah. Well, buy my books.
yeah, hey, that's a good.
Dan's book.
Send me a link and I'll put it in the show notes for afterwards and things like that. So cool.
Candy.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. This was fun. I saw a couple comments I want to answer real quick. I don't know what Hammer Spoon is. So I heard somebody talking about Graph SQL API. No, that's wrong. Similar type of thing to do APIs for tools that have bad APIs. So I'm going to try to play in with this, but I'll look up Hammer Spoon too. What was the other one? Phil, I saw all your comments. I appreciated that. And especially, yeah, this is totally really good for streamers and everything like that. I've been doing shortcuts since workflow for 10 years. So it's not 10, it's like 7 now, but it's been around for a while. But yeah. Do all of you edit on desktop? This was the one I was saying. Yeah, I think none of us actually edit. Or I was on a podcast that was edited too, but I prefer Ferrite, and so does Jason, I think. I don't think Dan, I'm not sure. He might edit one of his other podcasts. But Ferrite is very good. And I bet if it imports chapter markers, it probably does it in the same way that Logic does. So that's something I'm going to play around with. We could import these straight into Logic. Ooh, that would be sick too. Oh yeah. Nice to see you, Gene. Thanks for tuning in. And Jared, yeah, crushing it on the shortcut stuff lately. So glad you've been around. If you have any ideas on how to improve this, put it on your blog and I'll link to that too. It's Manoj. Send me some info about this on Twitter. I'm curious. And Antonio, did you pre-order the Stream Deck pedal? Is that what that is? Nice. I hope so. The mini is also, I'm not gonna lie, I think I like it better than the main one. But all right, I think that's it for the stream. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I usually leave live streams up for a couple of weeks publicly, and then I put it into my membership and everything like that. And so you're going to be able to get all of these streams through my membership program in the future. But if you want to watch the replay in the short term, you're still able to do that. And you can access it from my blog, just MatthewCassinelli.com. There's a post here with it too. So that should be good. And yeah, in the comments actually of this YouTube video, I have all of the links to, Antonio ordered Dan's book. I have all the links to these articles that we talked about in here and on my blog post too. So you can get all the shortcuts there. And I'll put the link to Dan's book on my blog post as well. All right, folks, thanks for everything. If you do watch my streams regularly, my neighbor obviously does construction constantly, so I'd love to know if that was like bad or anything like that. I was trying to mute myself and things like that, so I always appreciate feedback on the streams and things like that. So, all right, everybody, I will see you in the next stream. I'm going to try to do these more regularly and have people on and just do my own working sessions where maybe I'll even do that Logic thing live. We'll see. I've been doing this for a while. We'll take some bit of energy, but I'm going to build up to it and do these more often. So thanks for tuning in, and I will see you all in the next one.